As I said, my purpose, my hope is to put what a CASA is or does in sort of the national context. It will certainly vary in the state of Montana, and in my experience, it will vary even within the state, depending on the jurisdiction. How many folks in the room are associated with CASA? Wow, they're all on this side. That's that's pretty interesting. We could do a whole psychological test on that one. And how about folks who are social workers, work for the department? Some of you guys, great. Attorneys? Oh, the only two attorneys are sitting up here. That's also interesting. Therapists, other therapists, great. Other stakeholders. What are some of you folks who didn't raise your hand? Yeah.
Foster parents.
Foster parents, great. I see another foster parent. Yes.
Pediatric registered nurse.
Nurse. Foster parent, great. Well, I hope that you'll find this beneficial in every facet of your involvement, because we're all a team. We all are a collaborative team with one specific, I think, intent. And that is to serve in the best interests of the children that are in dependency court. So, to get an idea of the history of CASA, we have to start by talking about the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. It's a huge mouthful. This is an association of, obviously, juvenile court judges, juvenile and family court judges. They're headquartered in Reno. This year, the NCJFCJ is holding its 77th annual conference. So this is not a newcomer to the whole concept of juvenile justice and family law. They've been around for a long, long time. Back in the mid-'70s, several of those judges came together and would talk both during the conference and after hours about a common dilemma. And that dilemma was that there are too many cases, not enough time on their dockets, overworked social workers, and in some cases, overburdened attorneys. And remember, that premise was 40 years ago. There are only a few of us probably in this room right now who are old enough to have memories of things 40 years ago. So this is unfortunately not a new dilemma, because this also sounds like they could have been talking about the current conditions in our dependency system. The judges knew that the caseloads and the docket calendar did not allow for intimate relationships and understanding by the department, and therefore the same would be true of the judges themselves, since the judges were relying on the department to get virtually all of their information. The judges were also keenly aware, I would say, that the decision in a case could and would dramatically alter the life of the child and the child's family. And they agreed that was a very heavy burden, considering that they may have 15 to 30 minutes on their docket calendar to make, these vital and life-changing decisions. So they started talking at these conferences about a way to use the concept of a guardian ad litem in the best interests of the child, much as they would engage a guardian ad litem for the elderly or disabled or anyone else who did not have the capacity to speak for themselves. These conversations continued at these annual conferences, and the dialogue would increase every time they got together. So as the story goes, Judge John Menendez from Las Vegas, Clark County, with Las Vegas, Nevada, in a post-conference cocktail hour, if you will, was the person who, some would say, shackled us, some would say honored us with the name of Court-Appointed Special Advocate. And the acronym, of course, is CASA. Judge Menendez thought it was a great idea. So did the judges that he was sitting with. They penciled it down on the proverbial cocktail napkin, and for 40 years that has stuck. But he and the judges didn't just obviously stop with a name, but they continued to brainstorm program structure, party status, roles, responsibilities, all of the foundational elements that make up a present-day CASA advocate. A few years later, in 1977, again, like I said, almost 40 years ago, Judge David Sukup, then the juvenile court judge in King County, Washington, which is Seattle, was the first to make this leap of faith. He went to his friends and his neighbors and talked, persuaded, cajoled some of them into participating in this new idea. A volunteer CASA advocate for a child independency court. So as you can see, CASA was created by judges to serve judges and ultimately to serve the child independency court, to give the judge the additional information he or she knew they needed to make those life-changing decisions. The intent of the court-appointed special advocate movement is and always has been to gain as much information and knowledge about the child's needs and their environment so that the very, very best decisions can be made. Understanding that what looks like a slight change to an adult can be an earth-shattering change for a child. And understanding that time has a very different meaning to a child than it does to an adult. I would ask you to just think back to your days as a grade school student. And it's the end of the school year, it's spring. It's a wonderful spring day, not like we're experiencing here in Helena today, or like we're experiencing back home. I live and work out of Bend, Oregon. Very similar climate. But think back to that day, and it's early June, and school is out for the summer. How long away was September? How long away? It was a lifetime away. You know, summer vacation was going to last forever, right? And then September came around, and it was fall, and school started. And then how long was it till Christmas? My goodness, that was, again, forever. You know, September, I remember thinking, who knows? I may not live so long enough to see, Christmas. That's so far away. We have to remember this sense of time in a child's life. When I was a program director, I used the metaphor, the analogy that this whole system is a little bit like a grocery store. There, for many years, we thought children and youth were sort of like cans of soup, or canned vegetables. Canned products can sit on the shelf for a long time and still be edible, right? But our thinking needs to be that these children, these youth, are much more like the produce department, right? They're like a head of lettuce. If they don't move off the shelf, if they don't get out of this system, in an expeditious manner, we're not doing our job, and we may lose a potential human being, or what that human being's potential is. So, understanding that, and the judges really started this, understanding that we needed to move expeditiously to permanency has always been a fundamental tenet, obligation of CASA. As CASA organizations, of course, we first have to make sure that we ensure safety. That's always number one. Is the child safe, not just physically, but is the child safe mentally and emotionally as well? Those are all three very key factors. Safety, is, as I said, is the child physically, mentally, and emotionally safe? And if not, absolutely first on the to-do list is what needs to happen to ensure that safety. Second, or 1A, is permanency. How will each and every decision, every action, every evaluation, every service being provided to this child and to this family expedite permanency? And I would challenge that if you can't answer that question, it's not the most important. You know, we need to be looking at permanency second, and then third is well-being. And that's the whole gamut of services that are provided. And I realize, you know, again, I was a local program director. I understand the pressure that we are under to produce outcomes. I mean, National CASA asks our locals and state programs for outcomes. We're in a data-driven, outcome-based. Everybody wants to know what the outcomes are. You know, return on investment is not just a private sector capitalistic term. Now we hear it, you know, the federal government wants to know what's their return on investment for the money that they invest. And things like educational outcomes become much easier to measure than safety or permanency. But we can't move well-being, or in my opinion, we shouldn't move well-being up higher on that list. Not too long ago, I was at a program, a nonprofit program, and I was facilitating and leading a board development training. So I was using their training room, and at the same time, well, not the same time, but at the same time period, they were also doing a pre-service training for a new class of CASA advocates. And the room was probably about a third of the size of this room, floor to ceiling with flip chart paper, right? You know, that sort of training model where we make sure we write everything down because somehow that's, you know, I as the facilitator remember it, but I don't know that means you're going to remember it. You know, some adult learning principles there. But so floor to ceiling, just imagine that there's all this flip chart paper, and as I was doing my training, I forgot to start my timer, so you give me a heads up. See, I brought it up here with me and forgot to start it. I was glancing around at these papers, and I pulled out a $20 bill, and I laid it on the table, and I said, I will give this $20 to anybody in the room who can find the word permanency. And it wasn't there. I mean, I'm a very frugal guy. I don't bet when I don't think I can win. You know, and the word wasn't there. And so in this board training, I also challenged them as part of their leadership and their governance is to make sure that their staff is always, you know, remembering permanency. And permanency is in a national, years ago, at National CASA, even our mission statement was to advocate for a safe, permanent home. We've come to know, and you who are in this business know, that not all these children or youth are going to end up in what we would call a home. So permanency is a relationship that the advocate is looking to find that adult who will become a permanent part of that child's life, someone who is willing to, you know, do the handshake, do whatever, do the secret password, whatever, that they will commit to be have that personal relationship with that child or youth for the rest of their life. And that's not the advocate. That's not the advocate's job. The advocate's job is to facilitate that relationship, help find that relationship, but not to necessarily be that person. So there are 4 basic tools that an advocate uses to perform their jobs. I'm going to touch on them lightly, and Angela will fill in a little bit more on the local level, but they are to investigate, facilitate, monitor, and advocate. So the one huge tool, or one huge part of the tools that a CASA advocate has that the rest of the team, the Child Protective Services, the dependency court team, has that they don't have is time. They have the time, the luxury of time to spend time talking to everyone involved in the case. to read the materials, the pertinent materials, to look into the history, the environment, the relationships, and the needs of the child, to discern what is needed to ensure safety and expedite permanency. And as I said, time is a rare commodity. Most of the other participants and other professionals in the system don't have that time. We facilitate. We facilitate by building relationships between all the parties. We work to create a collaborative environment. Now, I want to make sure no one mishears me. I said a collaborative environment. That does not mean we all agree. In fact, we're not doing our jobs necessarily if we all agree. But if we have one opinion here and one opinion here, and they collaborate, we may find the best solution is something, is the third option. And we always need to make sure that we understand that. We monitor. We monitor by keeping track of court orders, by making sure that ordered services don't fall through the cracks, that the services are both being offered and being received. Is mom and dad going to counseling? Are these things happening? It's not our job to know what happens, for example, in the therapist's office, but it is our job to know if mom showed up or dad showed up, because that's how we monitor and we make sure that the case is moving and we don't end up with a can of soup as opposed to a head of lettuce. Finally, we advocate. We take all this information that we've gathered through the investigation, the facilitation, and the monitoring, and then we speak up. Then we speak up. And that's both in the courtroom and outside of the courtroom. So we attend, or the advocate attends. I tend to think of myself as really, much closer probably to the system than I am, certainly anymore. But we attend any and all of the meetings that relate to safety, permanency, and well-being. I would guess that's probably every meeting. That is part of that. We share our thoughts and opinions with the other parties and interested players who provide the services and support to the child, youth, and their families. So that leads to the question of what is the criteria used or recommended that an advocate uses to formulate their thoughts and opinions. And to answer, does that mean I'm up? My 20 minutes are up? Okay, I'll go quickly. To answer that question, though, that question of how do we formulate our thoughts and opinions, I borrow from a former National CASA Association Judge of the Year. What he said, well, I'll just tell you what he said. When I see the CASA advocate walk into my courtroom, I see the wisdom of the community. That's what he sees. I see some looks on people's faces. They say, "Whoa, that's pretty different than what we've experienced." It probably is. So what do I mean? The advocate's place at the table is that of a professional community member. They are equal in professional status to all the other professionals at the table, but our area of expertise is that member of the community who through life experiences knows what, in their opinion, is best for the child, through all that data that they've collected. Their thoughts and opinions are not constrained by volumes of state policy or statute. Those are the areas of other professionals. The social worker, the policies, the attorneys, the statutes, the particular professional guidelines of therapists, etc. So some important dates that I'll touch on very quickly. As I said, in 1977, the first program was started in Seattle. In 1982, a group of local directors came together to form what is now called the National CASA Association. So much like the founding of local programs in the state of Montana, it was concerned people who saw a need and developed an organization. In 1984, the first 2 employees were hired as National CASA staff. In 1985, the first agreement between the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, which is OJJDP, division of the Department of Justice, the federal government, signed an agreement with National CASA, and we have become the conduit for federal money that we pass through to local organizations. Important to note that we, as part of our structure, have a designed pre-service training. What I've found through my years is deviations are all training issues. We have 3 different training models. The traditional model delivered in a classroom like this is 30 hours, so it's extensive training. There are 14 elements that must be covered in each of these 30-hour trainings. I have, on your thumb drive, I've included the cover pages of the training manual, so you know what an advocate has been trained on or is supposed to have been trained on. We also have independent study edition, primarily used in rural locations where 20 hours can be done, as the title implies, independently, individually, and then 10 hours are done in a classroom. An important part of the classroom training is that that's also a screening tool. Because an advocate participates in an interpersonal relationship, we got to be able to see how people interact and whether they're appropriate to be an advocate or not. And as Angela will point out, and I agree 100%, not everybody's cut out to be an advocate. And we got to have the only word I can think of, it goes back to my days of living in New York City. We got to have the chutzpah to say, no, you're not advocate material. I mean, we'll say it a little more politely than that. That's sort of the New Yorker in me. Anyway. And thirdly, we have something called the Flex training, which is 21st century, cutting edge, online, 15 hours online, interactive, and 15 hours in person. We also have standards. National CASA adopted standards in 1995 on a voluntary basis. Again, all of those standards are listed on your thumb drive for you so that you can see if your local program is complying with standards. Standards and the training are done not just by us sort of imposing, but we have committees. Committees are made up primarily of local and state organization people. Foster parents are on those committees. Social workers are on those committees. These are a collaborative effort. We don't dictate the standards, but we do hold local and state programs accountable for those standards. Currently, we have 900, I think it's about 925 programs nationwide, about 75,000 advocates, and we serve upwards of 275,000 children annually. Lest you think, though, that I look at advocates and advocacy in CASA through rose-colored glasses, rest assured that as in any human endeavor, advocates are not always successful in maintaining their boundaries, appropriate execution of their training, or complying with standards. They may need to be respectfully reminded that they're not social workers, that they're not attorneys, and that they're not therapists, that they have a job to do, but it's not one of those 3. They do, however, have a unique and statutorily designated perspective of being that professional member of the community and providing the community's collective wisdom to the court and the opportunity to be part of a team that ensures safety, expedites permanency, and promotes well-being, making positive changes in all of the lives that we're involved in. And I'd like to pass it along to Angela. Thank you.
Well, good morning. My name is Angela Campbell, and I am the director at CASA of Yellowstone County and Billings. As I told the first group this morning, I've never, ever in my life been kept to 20 minutes on anything. In fact, my husband says I talk more than that in my sleep at night, so I'm not really sure how well we're going to do this, but we're going to give it a try. I'll start my timer. There we go, and then I'll fail. So I'm the director in Billings, but Billings is actually one of 15 programs across the state of Montana. It's important for you to know, even before we start diving into a little bit to the how we do our business piece of it, that you understand that although there are 15 programs and we are all governed by the local standards set by National CASA, each program is actually set up differently. The reason for that is because we are all guided by an MOU, or a Memorandum of Understanding, that the CASA program signs with their local court. So really it's the court and the CASA program that determine what the parameters are for each CASA program. It determines how the CASAs act within that court process, the entire scope and role of the CASA in each of those court jurisdictions, and so therefore it can look different actually from one part of Montana to the other. Another thing that may hang you up a little bit is that you will hear me always refer to CASA volunteers as advocates. I hope I can maintain that. However, you'll also hear other folks refer to them as GALs or guardian ad litems. That also is different across the state of Montana. In Billings, GALs are actually paid attorneys that are on contract with our district courts. However, in Anaconda, GALs are in fact CASA advocates. So in order to keep things simple, we mess them up and confuse them and use the same term for different items across the state. So if you are wondering exactly what we meant, you might want to write it down and then take a look back and see it very well may be that GAL was used to refer to CASA in one case, but as an attorney in another situation. So some things are all the same though. Really, who's qualified to become a CASA advocate? Interestingly enough, and one of the things I love most about the CASA program is there's absolutely no prior experience needed. You do not have to have been a foster parent, a social worker, yourself have been through the system as a child and aged into adulthood. You don't have to have worked in human services. Our CASA advocates come from every kind of background you can imagine. In our program in Billings, we have doctors, we have lawyers, we have maintenance men, we have car salesmen, we have stay-at-home moms, we have quite a few retired teachers, and actually we have my new favorite, a young gal who's in her 20s and is an auto body tech. So you do not have to have come from or have a lot of familiarity with the human services field. And part of the reason for that is because in getting the wisdom in the community, you really need to have a broad base of people, which is why National CASA really encourages that all of us utilize as closely as we possibly can the training that's required through National CASA, that 30 hours of new advocate training, which does come in different formats, so that at least we know everyone's coming from the same base of training. All of our advocates that come into the system go through an extensive vetting process. All those questions people have always wanted to ask in a job interview that can be asked in a volunteer situation. So we get very personal and ask some very difficult questions of the people coming in, not because we want to dig into their lives, but because this is some of the most stressful and difficult volunteer work you can do. It is very emotionally taxing, and we are definitely placing people into situations where families are definitely in crisis and themselves are in a very dysfunctional situation. And the last thing we need to do is put someone else in crisis or in a dysfunctional situation into a system that's already struggling to deal with those things. So there's a very extensive vetting process, but you all should know there's also an incredible background check process. And a lot of that is required. In fact, we are not allowed Supreme Court funding and cannot sign contracts with the Supreme Court of Montana unless we do a very extensive background check, which includes criminal and local, national, includes sex offender registries. It includes an FBI fingerprint database check. And so it is very, very extensive background checks that are actually then done every 4 years and updated over and over again. So you can't obviously plan for everything, but we do a really good job of learning who the person is that's coming in to the system. And then the other thing we do is in training. The training's really set up for us to get to know the people. that we are working with. So once someone goes through the vetting process, once they go through training, and they pass the background check, then what happens is they become sworn in by a court to become an officer of the court and to become a CASA advocate. If you're wondering how it is CASAs get appointed, well, 15 programs, meaning there's almost 15 different ways across the state of Montana to get appointed. So it really depends on your jurisdiction. Again, CASA programs sign an MOU with the court. The MOU almost always outlines how people will get appointed in your jurisdiction. So if you are a CASA and have never seen your MOU, I strongly encourage you to lay your hands on it. If you're a foster parent and you're curious, you're always more than welcome to call the CASA office, and we actually spend a fair amount of time in Billings talking to our foster parents. We do training with them, that kind of thing as well. Social workers, we actually do orientations with, as well as attorneys and judges. So the MOU really outlines how CASAs get appointed in many areas. Thankfully, right now, the court jurisdictions are able to appoint a CASA for every case. CASA programs are set up by court jurisdiction in Montana. What that means is Billings is the only program that serves just one county because our court jurisdiction is so large. If you think about Eastern Montana and the angels that run Eastern Montana CASA, not only do they serve more than one jurisdiction, they serve, I can't remember, 9, 10, 11, 12 counties. And so they travel all over the whole eastern side of Montana with 1.5 staff people. So the courts really set up then how those programs function as well. So in Yellowstone County, we are unfortunately the program in the state that struggles the most to serve all our kids. In fact, over half the children in Yellowstone County right now do not have a CASA. On average, we have 550 kids in care a year. We serve 300 of those. However, our numbers have exploded so much in the first 2 months. We're on track this year to have 800 kids in our system in Yellowstone County. So our MOU outlines how we will assign. How do we prioritize what kids float to the top? So that is part of the piece of how do I know if I have a CASA on my case. Most of you will either get the phone call saying, hi, I'm so-and-so and I've been appointed to serve on the case, and you're either the attorney or the foster parent, teacher, that kind of thing. If you work in a field of work where CASAs want information from you, then they will bring their court order to you. Their court order will tell you exactly what information you can provide them if you're a nurse, if you're a teacher, that kind of thing. Many times we encourage you to take a photocopy of their court order, put it in the child's records, so it's not a problem down the road if someone ever questions as a teacher, why did you let this person talk to you about the child? In Yellowstone County, we always place a copy of the CASA court order in the school records. But that is part of the CASA's job, is to reach out to all of those individuals who are involved. If you ever have a question about if you have a CASA on a case you currently have, call your local CASA office and you can find out that way. So Michael really touched on what the roles of the CASA are. If I was mean, I would come back and give you a quiz right now and say, what are the 4 pillars of being a CASA? But I've done such a great job this morning. I've worn my first cup of coffee and just dumped my second on my notes. And I'm assuming many of you are having the same luck that I am. So I'm not going to quiz you, but I'm going to run through them very quick. The first role of the CASA, and these are the 4 pillars, and these should be being practiced across the state regardless of the program. The first pillar is to facilitate. Michael explained that to you, and I'm going to explain it to you shortly this way. I really see the CASA as the hub of the wheel. If you think about it, if you've ever been in court, when you go in court, the person that's often not there is the child. So if the child is the center of the case with the CASA, who is there is the judge, the social worker, the county attorney representing the social worker, mom's attorney, dad's attorney. If there are possible putative fathers, then there's an attorney for every one of those possibilities that we know about. And so there's all these people in court. Who's also not involved in that picture necessarily in court is the teacher, the therapist, the foster parents, the person doing the visitation coaching with mom and dad, the person doing supervised visits, all these other individuals. So really what the CASA's job is to make sure everybody has the same information every month in a report and everyone's receiving the same information so they can act on it. Serve as the hub of the wheel. If the teacher says to the CASA, little Johnny's flunking his classes, and I think the real reason is because he's afraid to ask for help because he's so depressed. teacher's comments, not the CASA's. The CASA should take that factual information that was reported by a teacher, put it in their report, and say, the teacher reports she believes little Johnny is not doing well in school because per the teacher's assessment, Johnny is depressed. If the CASA facilitates that information, now the social worker has the knowledge they need, because if you remember right, social workers aren't working on one case like the CASA. They're working on 15 cases, and they're on call because apparently they're not busy enough. They need to be on call too, and they're handling crises in every one of the cases they're working on. So they need that information facilitated. This way, the foster parent, if the social worker says something to them and says, hey, have you noticed this? The foster parent can get involved with the school, or the foster parent can say to the social worker, I've noticed it too, set up therapy and I'll get the child there. And this way, the judge also knows what's happening in the case. So that hub of the wheel, facilitating that information, is key, because if it doesn't happen, the child doesn't have a voice in court or in the system. The CASA's job is to advocate, second pillar. Question always gets asked, is it the CASA's job to advocate for the child or the parents? Well, it's obviously the CASA's job to advocate for the child. People often say it looks like they're advocating for the parent. Well, for those of us who've worked in the system for any amount of time, what we know is that our primary goal is always, per national law, to reunify these children with their parents if they can be reunified safely. So it may look for a little while like the CASA is advocating for the parent. They're not. They may be cheerleading, hoping that, just a little boost from that CASA will get the parent moving, will get the parent, on track. But then the second question I often get asked is, well, why does the CASA change their mind? Well, because the CASA's job isn't the parent. The CASA's job is permanency for this child. And so the CASA changed their mind because they rah-rahed and they got behind the parent and they said, oh, you're doing a great job on your treatment plan. That's great. Little Johnny says he's having a great time at visitations with you. And then if the parent goes completely and totally off the map, the CASA may have a very sudden change of heart and say, we've been at this 12 months and mom was doing good, but now mom, we can't even find her. And what Johnny needs now is permanency. And so it's not that CASAs are wishy-washy. It's that their job is permanency for that child. And if they can rah-rah a parent and achieve reunification, then hopefully, they can make that connection and do that. But if that changes, then the direction for that child and the advocacy needs to change direction as well. This third point is to monitor. And why that's so important is because when parents start to work their treatment plans, often we end up 12, 13, 14, 15 months into a case. And really, if you have had an opportunity at all to work with social workers, you'll know that they get the lovely job of working in crisis. And so their cases boil over, and they have multiple cases. And so in that situation, what do? You have to attend to the child that needs a placement today. You have to attend to the call that came in last night. Who is the one person who is assigned to this case, whose only job is this case, to follow up as this case is in the slow phase of moving along? It's the CASA. So it's the CASA who's so important in the monitoring phase to come in and say, hey, I know there's fires over here, but you need to know in this case what's happening right now is these foster parents are exhausted and they need support. And we need to get them respite so this kid can continue to stay. Or they need to come in and say, hey, this kid's been doing fine till now, but like most kids who struggle with understanding the concept of time, now we're a year in and this kid doesn't think permanency is ever going to happen and he's starting to really show some signs of being depressed. We need to get this child some help. That's really where the CASAs can make a big impact, is in that monitoring phase when the case looks like it's going along. Is actually a lot of times when kids bottom out. And it's the CASA facilitating that information that brings this case back up on the top of the radar. And the fourth pillar is to investigate. And Michael Heaton is right. As staff, what we spend a lot of time doing, it makes our job so fun. Enforcing boundaries. Makes us unpopular. It makes us, sometimes we get grumbled at. But the fact of the matter is I say all the time, if you're a black and white person, you don't belong in social welfare, because it's all a shade of gray. It may be dark gray one day, and then all of a sudden everything goes great and it's light gray, and then next week and it's dark gray and black. So that is what our cases look like. And our job as staff is to help our advocates navigate that, both emotionally, but also within the boundaries of what their job is as a CASA. So investigation happens, but I say in training all the time, none of you are Magnum PIs. Nobody show up at my office in short shorts, and don't chase somebody down to the bar, go in and give them a false name just to find out how often grandma and grandpa are drinking after they drop the kid off, and then expect us to be able to prep you well enough to put you on the stand, because we've got a problem now. You're outside your scope. You're outside your boundaries. You're not Magnum PI. So how do CASAs investigate cases? Technically, CASAs can contact anyone that's been involved in the child's life. They have a court order that really, in a lot of ways, grants us access to almost everything. Of course, we're still bound by HIPAA issues, just like everyone else. But really what it comes down to is it's the CASA's job to become the expert on that child. What that means, though, and I think where a lot of the misinterpretation happens is, and I love the program, I'm no way dogging it, but the CASA's job is never to be the big brother, big sister for the child. If you come into the CASA program thinking you're going to spend 70, 80, 90% of your time with the child, the fact of the matter is that you have a total misconception of CASA. Technically in the CASA program, you're going to spend 10, 20, 30% of your time with the child, and the rest of your time with lawyers. Isn't that fun? I know a lot of people get really excited about that. We don't advertise that when we recruit. I'm a lawyer, I could say that, but it's true. You know, if you're advocating for a child, your time is not spent spending all your time becoming the buddy and the best friend of the child. Your time is spent investigating. Your time is spent facilitating, and your time is spent in meetings advocating. So there is a standard by National CASA, and it's not just a recommendation, it's a strict standard by National CASA. And that is that the CASA has got to see that child a minimum of once a month, every month. And if not, as staff, we have to document why. So I can't stress that enough to foster parents. We need your help. We need your cooperation. We know that you are running often more than one foster kid, 5, 6, 7 of them, to therapist appointments, school appointments, speech therapy appointments, dentists, doctors. I mean, we know you've become taxi services, but we have got to get in to see that child in their living situation a minimum of once every single month, and we need your help to do that. So what is the role of the program staff? Oh, my kids are so cute. Look at that. The role of the program staff is different for every single program because every program is different. I will say if you work as a CASA or you work with a program that doesn't have a lot of program staff, the program staff is the most taxed, pulled, running in 45 different directions group of people there is. If you have a small program staff, what you're looking at is someone who does the recruitment, the training, the fundraising, the administration, the HR if they have staff people, and also then fills in for every person who can't make a court hearing, can't go to an FGDM, can't go to a TDM, and can't make a pre-hearing conference or mediation. So that's one staff person. Oh, and by the way, they're supposed to man the office from 8 to 5. So as you can imagine, it really depends on the size of your program. The role of the program staff, and this gets significantly clearer, and you will see it a lot more. You'll see a lot more similarities between your CASAs if you have enough program staff to do these things. The job of the program staff is not to be the case manager. The CASA advocate on the case is the case manager. It's the program staff's job to gut check with them. You know, I'm looking at your report. There's a lot of feelings in here. I don't see a lot of facts. Judges can't rule on feelings. So if what you say in your court report is this is the most beautiful little boy I've ever seen, and he just really needs permanency, and it's so sad everything that's happened to him, we agree that's all true. But I joke all the time, if you wrote in the exact opposite, this is the most ugly, evil child I've ever seen, Would a court ever be able to do anything with it, and would it go anywhere? No, it's the same thing. It's not a fact. The court can't do anything with it. What the court needs to be able to see are facts and observations that you can testify to, or CASAs can testify to in court. So the CASA staff's job is to go through those reports and say, a lot of emotion in here, but tell me what you saw. Tell me who said that. Tell me where you verified that. Their job is to gut check and say, are you too involved with mom? Are you so much on mom's side that you're not seeing the whole picture? Are you so involved with the foster parent? We see that quite often. The CASAs just love the foster parents because our foster parents are phenomenal. We have great foster parents, at least in our county. But the fact of the matter is, the bottom line is that it's not the foster parent's decision or the CASA's decision whether that child goes with the foster parents. The first decision is, can this child be reunified safely? And so we can't have CASAs who can become so emotionally enmeshed their only desire is for the foster parents to adopt. So the job of the staff is to do the gut check, to do the boundaries and be the boundaries enforcers, to have conversations about policies, what we do and why, and to make sure those reports are fact-based and are observations that someone could get on the stand and testify to. So a couple situations in which CASAs have made huge impacts, and I'm going to give these examples in this session because we have several foster parents in here. When we talk about facilitating, one of the best examples I saw was a situation in which the foster parent was getting so frustrated to the point that there was, I think, even possibly consideration of saying, you know what, maybe these kids should live elsewhere. But the kids were doing great there. The foster kids were going to visitations with mom, and these kids had real issues with sugar. In fact, one child in particular had so many teeth replaced or capped and dental work done when he came into the system. And so what the foster parents were reporting was this child or children, I can't remember after so many cases, came back after visits with mom and was just bouncing. I mean, just so much, because mom was supplying the child with sugar and soda and everything else. And it was really having an impact in the foster home. I mean, on the foster parents, on the other kids, and it was avoidable. Generally, as a rule, those are not the kind of issues a judge is going to rule on in court, is what the kid can have for snacks at visitations, right? So the CASA, trying to be creative, said, well, you know who the person of authority would. So this isn't the foster parents, looks like they're coming down on the parent. This doesn't look like the social worker's coming down on the parent. The CASA did the right thing, called the social worker, and said, this is your case. What I'd like to do is I would like to get a hold of the dentist that did all this work and have him write a letter. And the social worker said, go for it, that'd be great. So the CASA contacted the dentist, explained the situation. Dentist wrote a letter on dental letterhead that said it is this doctor's recommendation the child, eat the following kind of things and not eat the following kind of things. CASA presented that to mom. Well, mom's doing everything she can, or as much as she can at the time, to get her child back. And so, of course, she's happy to get a letter from a doctor and adjust her behavior. And now nobody's the bad guy, right? So solves the problem, thinks outside the box, facilitates the issue. Another great example was a foster parent who could not get the child scheduled for doctor's appointments. I have no idea why, but the secretary in this particular office kept saying, you're not the actual parent, and you don't have the authority to schedule. And so the CASA goes to see the kid. The foster parent is in tears. They are so frustrated. They've had it. And so the CASA, who's an attorney and is very bold, said, this is ridiculous. I have a court order. And so tell me the next time you're going to the doctor. And she told her. And so went in with her and she slapped her court order down and she said, I want you to get the doctor to come out here and take a look at this. We're scheduling an appointment. And we're not leaving until we schedule an appointment. This foster parent needs this child seen. And if you don't like it, I'm going to call the judge. And that kid had that appointment scheduled and several follow-up appointments scheduled by the time they left. Another way that a CASA could really help facilitate a situation to get something done for the child. So the other issue really with CASAs is we work so hard to match the right CASA with the right case because, and Emily's going to talk about this more. One of our primary goals in our program in Billings is that the CASA be the one constant, that no matter how long this case lasts, no matter how many different foster families, how many different teachers, how many different social workers, that there's one person that's still on this case. And the best example of that is we had a case that lasted, and it was not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. We had a case that lasted 7 years. 2 of the 3 girls were adopted. The 3rd girl was deemed by the state to be unadoptable. Later, there was finally a determination made that they would give one more try and place her through the Waiting Child program again. She was placed, and an adoptive family was identified with her incredibly particular needs, someone who was able to work with her. And when she went to be adopted after 7 years in the system, the CASA went to see her perform in, I believe it was a band concert, and she looked out into the audience and she saw her bio mom. And nobody had any idea this teenager had reached out and found her biological mother. So that issue was addressed, and some counseling was done to help this girl process the grief and everything she was going through. And the day she was adopted, the girl said to the CASA, if I didn't have you, I wouldn't have a history. When it came time, nobody knew the schools I'd been in. You were the only one that had all the pictures of me every year through the years through school. No one knew all the places I'd lived. No one knew the places I'd played sports and who my friends had been. No one knew if I looked like my mom. No one knew if my sisters were still okay. You're my history, because now when I was adopted, this lady that adopted her was able to put together a book for her. So she had some memories. And that is really what we try to do, is we try to match the right person to the right case so that our CASAs continue all the way till the case closure. So one last thing I'm going to talk about. I kind of feel like I'm a parent of toddlers sometimes, because I feel like in my job I spend a lot of time saying no, 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 no. So here's the list of CASA no-nos, okay? CASAs are not, and I can't express this enough, not social service providers. Our job is to come in and to empower families as much as we can, to speak for kids and empower kids to speak for themselves. But our job is not to provide. We are not the social worker. They are far more trained than we are in many different ways. We are not the therapist. They are specially trained in ways we are not trained. We are not the foster parent. They are specially trained in ways we are not trained. We are there to be the advocate, the expert on the child. What that means is that we do not supervise visits between parents and children. And there's a reason we don't supervise visits, other than the obvious liability. We're not trained parenting coaches. And if we're going to get on the stand and testify to what we saw, then we should have been the person sitting there observing it, not the person sitting there teaching it. We do not offer babysitting services. And our foster parents, God bless them, sometimes are so stressed they say, oh, you're here. Let me run down just to the corner and grab a thing of milk. Technically, we should not be doing that. In CASAs, we should be saying, no, you're the one with the responsibility of the child. I'll walk down there and walk around the store with you if you want while you get milk. But you know, we need to be together with the child. I can't babysit. There is one thing that is different depending program to program, but in our program and several programs in Montana, CASAs are not allowed to transport. So as much as we know it would make the lives of social workers so much easier, we get that. And it's probably the biggest complaint I hear every single week. But the issue is we're not social services providers. The family, we are there to empower them. The family needs to be able to stand on their feet if we can reunify them when we leave. The CASA cannot be the thing that stays involved in that family to make that family function once a case closes. The family needs to be able to work out transportation. The CASA needs to be able to help them. We've had CASA say, I will teach you how to follow a bus schedule. I will meet you at this place and we will learn the bus system in Billings, Montana. We've had CASAs do that. They're empowering, they're not enabling, so that mom can stand on her own 2 feet at the end. Our job is not to provide supplies. It would be the easiest thing in the world for me to pull my checkbook out and pay for the shoes that Dad needs for his kids. However, next year when I'm gone on the case, Dad needs to know where he can go get shoes for his kids when school starts. It would be the easiest thing in the world for me to reach into my savings. Well, it would be hard because I want to reach into my savings account. I'd rather go to Tahiti, but I could reach into my savings account and pull $1,000 out and buy a car for somebody. I could do it. But the fact of the matter is I've not helped them. I've not taught them, how to deal with that themselves once the CASA is out of the case, once the case is closed. And the best example of this I can give, and then I'm done, is a situation that received the award for the state for a CASA of the year. And it was someone who easily could have reached into her wallet. Everything from fans for the house to shoes for the kids, backpacks, groceries. And it was a situation where there was 5 kids and dad had never, ever parented. Ever. He had been out of the situation. Mom had severe mental health issues, and she had pushed him out often. And so he was the breadwinner, and mom controlled everything that had to do with the kids. And the social services department said, Dad, would you consider raising these 5 kids under, I think it was like 10 or something. I mean, it just gives me chills to think about it. I mean, teenagers are in and of themselves, you only need one at a time. So 5 at once. And this dad said, well, I'll try, but he had no idea. He had no idea how to be a dad. And so the CASA went in. I'm going to empower, not enable. I'm going to empower, not enable. And she taught that dad everything. She taught him how to cook meals. She taught him how to shop for groceries. When he needed fans, she reached out, called all over town, found out what places in town would offer those resources. She took them back to him and left him, and he had to make the phone calls. He had to follow up. He needed daycare. She said, you work at a really, a place that's pretty supportive. Would you ever be comfortable emailing people at work? So he sent an email out to work, and people came forward and said, 5 kids is a lot, but my sister owns a daycare center. She can fit that many kids in, or what? And so dad kept coming back, and he was empowered, and he just kept building up on his successes, and this CASA was going, good job, all the way, helping him with things all the way along the line. Wouldn't you know it, we're years down the road, that dad's still parenting his kids. Those kids have never come back into the system, and they're doing awesome. And that's exactly what our role is as a CASA. So Emily is going to talk to you about her role.
Hi, my name is Emily Von Jentzen. I'm an Assistant Attorney General for the State of Montana's Child Protection Unit. And I handle solely dependency cases within 5 different counties. I am in Flathead County, Lincoln County, Sanders County, Lake County, and Glacier County. Cases come to me when a county attorney has a difficulty with resources. The case might be a difficult case. It might have a complex legal matter. So generally, my cases are not the ones that end in reunification. I would say 90% of the cases that I have end in termination. So I'm going to talk to you today about some ways that I have seen CASA volunteers and the CASA program really positively impact the dependent neglect cases. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some situations where the CASA volunteers' conduct may have hindered the case, which is, I have far less experience with that than I do on the positives. So most of my talk will be focused on positives. One way in which CASA volunteers have improved cases is by supplying the reports on time to the parties within at least a week in advance of a hearing. Attorneys in particular don't like surprises to come up before hearings. So when we get reports of CASA that are well researched and investigated reports, we generally can provide appropriate response. And if issues do come up, the social worker can be directed by the state's attorney to investigate and figure out solutions to the problem. The judge doesn't like it when we come to court and someone raises an issue and nobody has an answer to it because we haven't had time to think about it. The other way we get a lot of help from CASA volunteers in our cases is by very detailed reports. And this is not to belittle any of the counties that I'm not experienced with or the counties that I'm not referencing here, but the best reports that I've seen in my jurisdictions are coming out of Flathead County, and they are very detailed in that they include bulleted sections. One of the best sections would be the summary information contained in the reports. They indicate the length of time the CASA has been involved, so their appointment going back to, say, 2012, and we're in 2015. And then they indicate the hours they've spent on a case. So when you're weighing evidence in a legal matter and you have somebody come before you and say, I have spent 400 hours on this case, it really gives a little bit more weight to what they are bringing in terms of their opinion before the court. And then when the judge has to compare that with things like a therapist that maybe just jumped on board with a kiddo in the last 3 months, they might give more weight to a CASA volunteer if they know that information. The summary information also includes the names and ages of the children, the number of contacts the CASA has had with the children, and then the total number of contacts with other professionals they've had in the case. These really well-written reports also include the list of records that they've reviewed, the names of individuals that they have interviewed, and that's great because as an attorney, we can look at the report and know exactly where the information came from. So most of the questions that we would ask the CASA, where did this information come from, is already contained in the report. Also, the reports that are done really well contain a listing of the children's placements. Now, when attorneys come into court, for example, I have approximately 75 children on my caseload at any given time. I would imagine that the judge has a lot more kids total on the caseload, on their caseload, and it's hard to remember the specifics of each individual case, specifically the number of places that kids have been. So to get a CASA report that indicates not only that the child has had 8 placements in the last year, but that those placements each lasted between 1 and 2 months, to see that when you're in a court hearing where we're talking about, oh, how did this child end up with reactive attachment disorder? You know, those kind of things really bring issues about how do we find a stable placement to the forefront of everybody's mind. The other thing that the good reports contain are summary of visitations that the CASA has had visits with the child and might show how the child's opinions or wishes are changing over time. And in particular, one of the best sections in the reports that I'm seeing are differentiation under the needs and wishes of the children that include a section on psychological and emotional needs, safety and protection needs, and then the specific wishes of the children. If any of you are familiar with kids, which most of you are, those things often are not the same. A child's wishes might not be the same as what their psychological or emotional needs are. So to see which section those kind of fit into is really helpful. And then the reports usually end up with a summary conclusion section with the advocate's opinions or concerns, and then their recommendations for the court. Now, one of the ways also in which the CASA volunteers really add something extra to the dependency cases from a legal standpoint is that they have the most consistent contact with the children. The department social workers are continuing to be more and more burdened by their caseload numbers and the paperwork requirements that they have within their job, which means that they are getting out to see kids probably there once a month that they are required. Most CASA volunteers I know are seeing kids more often than that. And when I've had cases that have spanned years, 3, 4, 5 years, the CASA volunteer is generally the most consistent professional on the case. The attorney might have changed 3 times, a new judge may have taken over. Their own caseworker within the department, generally in a year's time, might change 2 or 3 times. So the CASA volunteers' contact with the children and contact over time is really important for the court to have that picture of the child. Now, there are situations that excuse limited contact with a child. Sometimes we get kids that get placed in different counties. Sometimes the kids are placed out of state or in residential treatment out of state. And that makes it difficult, particularly when we're talking about volunteers, to get on a plane and go visit kids once a month. But in those situations, the CASA volunteers that do an excellent job, they make up for that lack of contact by having more contacts over the phone, maybe with a CASA or with the foster parents, with the child's teachers, with the child's doctors, therapists. And generally, the CASA volunteer has a solid understanding of any special needs that a child might have. So if they are not in a situation where they can see the child as frequently as normal, they are at least advising the court of special needs and how the needs are being addressed by talking to the people who are providing services. Now, The other thing that CASA volunteers, in my experience, have done is brought issues to light that maybe might not have been raised by any other party in a case. And a lot of times kids have something that's really important to them that as adults we might not even think about, when our primary concern is removing them from an unsafe situation and getting them in a safe placement. And one example I have of that is a case in which we removed 10 children. And you can imagine that a removal of 10 children, particularly early on in a case, is a really difficult task to find foster homes, to make sure all the kids' services are set up, to get the parents started on a treatment plan, to identify all the fathers. So that's what the department's juggling with at the beginning of a case like that. It's a monster case with a lot of different things that the department has to consider. Well, one of the children was 9 or 10 at the time, and the only thing that was important to him at that time was that his bike got left at home, and he wanted his bike. He was not concerned about seeing his mom. He was not concerned about seeing his siblings, but he wanted his bike. So the CASA volunteer brought the issue before the court, and we were all arguing about other things. And, by the end of it, the mom either denied that there ever was a bike or said the child lost the bike. And it was really interesting because in this room full of people, 4 or 5 adult professionals volunteered by the end of this conversation to buy the child a new bike. But that was something that was the most important thing on the child's mind, and it would not have been even brought up had it not been for the CASA volunteer. The other sorts of things that CASA volunteers can bring to light is that there might be issues with the child not seeing their siblings enough if they're placed in different placements, or the child wanting to see friends from their old school because they had to change schools with a new foster placement. So those things, particularly when the CASA volunteer is the constant, the child is more likely to tell things like that to their CASA volunteer as opposed to the social worker who may have changed several times and they haven't formed a relationship with. Additionally, the CASA volunteers, when they do good investigations, have contact with the most people in the case, all of the individuals close to the child. And they usually, when we have really good CASAs, are flushing out concerns. Maybe they get information that could be a concern, but they do the extra legwork that the social worker may not have gotten to yet and figure out if it is a valid concern and it needs to be brought to the court's attention. On the flip side of that, there are situations when we get concerns being noted that are from unreliable sources like Facebook or Twitter. And excuse me. And those situations, a good CASA volunteer would say, a concern has been raised by looking at the mother's Facebook page that they may be engaged in drug use, but I have not been able to corroborate that. Or if they were able to corroborate, they will say the information. It's not just sticking a printout of a Facebook page onto your report. So avoiding unreliable information and making sure you have a good, thorough investigation generally adds another level of factual information to our cases. Now, when issues arise in dependency cases, issues that can be relieved by better CASA work, some of those circle around the volunteer having a poor understanding of their role. So CASA volunteers are not trained to judge whether or not the department followed policy. The department policy is long and extensive, and much of the continuing training that social workers have to go through is on the changes in policy that are constantly happening. The CASA volunteers are not attending, nor are they required to attend those trainings. So their role is not to make assessments as to whether or not policy has been followed. Their role is also not to analyze the law. In dependency cases, there are at least 3 or 4 attorneys, and there can be many more depending on how many fathers you've got. And then there's the judge. Those are the people whose role it is to argue the law, and the judge gets to determine whether or not the law has been followed or not. And CASA trying to get into that mix generally isn't the best idea. Additionally, the CASA volunteers are not trained to approve or license placements. Now, if you are made aware of an option for a placement and the department isn't aware of maybe that family member or that family friend, certainly bring it to the social worker's attention. But the CASA volunteers are not doing background checks on homes. They are not the licensing department within the state. So, you need to be careful when you can make recommendations, but it's not your role to say until a parent or until a placement has been licensed or investigated by the licensing department, whether or not that placement is appropriate. CASA's role is simply put to advocate for the child's best interest, and they are the only person in the courtroom whose only job is to do just that. Issues arise sometimes when the CASA volunteer simply relies on another party or parrots the position of another party. Now, a lot of time there's a natural association between a CASA volunteer and a child's attorney. However, in the state of Montana, the child's attorney's role is to tell the court the child's expressed wishes. So if the child says, I want to go to the moon, the child's attorney should be relaying what the child actually says. The difference between that and the best interest, as most of you know, is that a lot of times what the child wants to return home 90% of the time might not be in the child's best interest due to safety concerns. So that's why it's important that each individual is doing their specific role as opposed to just buddying up and coming up with the same position for both. There are also situations where CASA volunteers get too close or get too aligned with parents. And that is common early on in cases, and as well it should be. If we're really working towards, as a group, working towards reunification, everyone should be trying to get the parents to step up and do what they need to do. But when you get to a situation where you are 3 years into a case and we have minimal compliance with the treatment plan, if a CASA volunteer is really advocating for the child's best interest, at that point, there really should be more of a move towards, we need to find something else in terms of what the permanent option is going to be, and it doesn't appear the parents are going to be able to do it. The other issue when we have problems with CASA would be when reports are submitted late. Sometimes CASA volunteers, and this is very rare, but it does happen, CASA volunteers like to feel like they found something that nobody else found, like they were the best investigator, and so they keep something to themselves and then come in the day of court, hand it to the parties as the case is being called when no one's even had a chance to read it, as if to get brownie points for being the one that found the secret. Well, that's not helpful, again, because without being able to prepare and respond to that, the court is in a situation where we've got new information that has come up and nobody can offer a solution. So it usually would result in continuance of things or pushing things down the road, which is really never helpful when we're talking about a child's best interests. The other times when issues arise with CASA volunteers would be when the CASA doesn't have enough contact with the child. Again, there are people whose sole role it is to make sure the child has a voice in the courtroom, and if those folks are not doing their jobs, we're back 40 years or wherever we said CASA began, and we're missing that component from the court cases. The other thing that I didn't address in the last session, but since this session is a lot less volunteers and more professionals that may be having contact with CASAs, is the dissemination of information. CASAs have their court order that says they can basically get pretty much anything. I mean, they have a really wide area of investigation they can go into, but their order nor the statute permit them to disseminate any information back. So if you're at the doctor's office and a CASA volunteer comes to you asking questions, and then you turn around and say, well, what can you tell me about how the parents are doing? The CASA volunteer technically cannot answer those questions. And a lot of times service providers wanting to be as involved as possible will ask CASA for things like the parents' treatment plans. The CASA cannot give those. And the best course of action if you are a service provider and think that you need those is to contact the department or the department's attorney. Now, there's very little case law at the Supreme Court level addressing CASA or guardian ad litem in the advocate role specifically. There is one case that speaks directly to CASA or GALs, and that case is In Re RMT, and the site for that is 2011 MT 164. And the issue in that case was whether or not a birth father was wrongfully denied an opportunity to cross-examine the guardian ad litem or CASA who had submitted a report. And the court held that once a factual report is submitted to the court, an advocate does, or a parent or party does have the right to cross-examine that advocate. So if you think that submitting a report means that you're off the hook for any potential testimony, unfortunately you're wrong. But in this case, it did not result in a reversal of the district court's decision because the court did not rely on information that was solely contained in the guardian ad litem or CASA report that wasn't testified to by other witnesses. But it was notable in that case that the concurring opinion also emphasized that the guardian ad litem or CASA is charged with representation of the child's best interests, and that the guardian ad litem or CASA may not function as the youth's attorney. So again, there is case law, and despite the fact that in Montana there are still jurisdictions that do some of these things that are urged against by the Supreme Court, there's not a lot of times where that specific issue is coming up before the Supreme Court to decide. So that's all that I had for my portion of the presentation, and now I think we're going to open it up to questions for approximately 10 minutes.
Suppose grandma, I just attended the last session about kinship care. Suppose grandma is the permanent placement, but something happens in the family system that disrupts that as a good option. And the CASA checks in, like you just described, every 6 months just to be a friendly, how's it going? And the CASA now, the case is over, technically, legally, how might the CASA get involved in that case?
The CASA that's a great question. So a case is closed, and down the road, the CASA learns there's problems. The CASA, the only option the CASA has is to follow Montana statute and to call centralized intake in Helena and report that there's a problem in the family. The CASA is not legally involved in that case until DPHHS makes a decision that this case is going to be investigated, that this case is going to be screened in and referred to the prosecuting attorney to be reopened in court. If and when all of that happens and the case gets reopened in court, then the judge can choose to reassign that CASA. But until all of those steps happen and the case gets reassigned, technically the CASA has no legal grounds to be involved, and I would say should not be involved at all. Because, and we encourage our CASAs to think about this all the time, about 16% of cases disrupt nationally, about 8 or 9% if they have a CASA come back into the system. If you want to be reappointed to that case and work with this family again, how are you going to do that and be an advocate for that child if you've become mom's buddy over the last 3 years?
Yeah, and I just would support, obviously, what Angela said, and remind you that the CASA advocate is at least I believe in Montana, I know in most states, CASAs are mandatory reporters. So they have a responsibility as a citizen and a mandatory reporter to make that report like Angela said, but that's all they're mandated to do until the decision is made to open another case. Another question? Yes. I'm coming, Jerry. I'm coming.
That goes along with kind of my question on enforcing boundaries. When a CASA continually colors outside the lines, do you have a 3 strikes, you're out rule? How do you, as a program director, handle someone who continues even after being counseled, talked to, everything? How do you guys handle that?
We don't have a 3 strikes and you're out rule because some people, well, in my opinion, because kids don't deserve to have someone have 3 strikes. Kids deserve more than that. And because I listen a lot to our employment attorney who says never put anything down into a policy you're not willing to enforce even on your bad days. So we don't have a 3 strikes and you're out rule. What we do as a program is we have a grievance policy, obviously, but then we also sit down and we do one-on-one coaching with the person normally. Then when the staff person comes to my office and they say, Angela, can you put on your mediator hat, which is what my original training is, then we sit down with the person and the executive director, which should be a big warning sign if they're in the room. The executive director and the staff person and the advocate sit down together. And then basically it's just these are the basic tenets of CASA, that we've written in. You got to see the kid every month. You got to write a report every month. You got to turn your hours in every month, and you got to communicate with everybody. And if you're not doing those things, then we actually take a pretty strong stance, which is your job is to be the voice for the child. And if you're not doing it, it's not just you failing the program and our ability to use some of those avenues for funding. You're failing the child and this child deserves more. This child deserves more than what you're giving. And so we hold pretty strong to that, and we fire people, I guess, for lack of a better term. And we actually, unfortunately, went through a pretty big series of bringing everybody in line. The same rules apply to everybody, and there were several people that we had to say, this is your option, you have 2 months. And when they didn't do it in 2 months, we said, we're sorry, but kids deserve more than what you're giving.
One of the big issues that I've seen is that it's a training issue. It's a training issue. And one of the things that I worked with CASA in Yellowstone County and other programs around the country is developing what we call the pledge. And the pledge is used in that pre-service training, and we do it just like when you were in grade school. Everybody stand up just like you were going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and you say, I, Michael Heaton, pledge, and I go through the non-negotiables. I will visit my child every month. I will turn my court report in 2 weeks in advance. I will do this, this, and this, and we recite it. And yeah, it becomes silly, right? But it hammers it in so that it's not a retraining, and it's done. The pledge is done every training session, without and those are and they're always termed non-negotiables.
Hey, Michael,
yeah.
Just a second. First, I think the pledge is on the flash drive, and Emily.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, please.
I would also add that from a legal perspective, if any party in a case believes that the CASA has acted inappropriately, there is a provision that a motion can be made to remove the CASA. I have not had a case in which that's happened. I think informally the issues are brought to the program's CASA director and they are addressed that way, and perhaps maybe in Montana it's being handled that way, but I haven't seen that statutory provision used, but it is out there.
Thank you.
And the one other thing I would say, too, is that we always draw it back to the big picture. Not that what you have to say is important. We always draw it back to the big picture is, yes, what you're doing is affecting this one child, but you need to understand by not conducting yourself in the same manner as the other 100 CASAs in the program, you are, in fact, affecting 300 kids this year. And so that's how we take a look at it. Your actions don't just affect one child. They affect every child we can serve.
I just had a quick question about how CASAs are appointed to our cases, because I've noticed that some of my cases have CASAs, some don't, and I'm so busy that I don't know why that is. I heard the MOU thing, that's the first time I've ever heard that, and I've worked for the department for 3 years. So I'm just how? Maybe just quick about how.
Can I ask where you work? Missoula, okay. I believe Missoula is not, Missoula's right here. Are you serving all of the kids that you have in your system right now? No. Okay. So Missoula is in the same position as several of us. In those situations, it's usually up to the CASA program to determine how and which kids will get served. I know in Billings there were so many questions. We did put it into our MOU that says the way we prioritize cases is by the following 9 steps, so that everybody was on the same page and knew what we were doing. And actually, when we revised our MOU, we added more things to that. It's up to the CASA program, and it's determined by a number of factors. One is, who do you currently have as CASAs? If you have a whole lot of medical people, you're likely to send more of those folks to a medically fragile child. If you have a whole lot of folks with mental health experience, you're more likely to assign those to cases where mom and dad have mental health issues, because those people have expertise that will really help in a case. You can always call the CASA office, and we really encourage this. It happens a lot in Yellowstone County. We ask you to call the CASA office and tell us what cases you want CASAs on. Jerry may come up here and kick me after I said that, but we do that a lot. In fact, for the first time ever, we had a public defender call us and say, I know you think that I've said this before, but I really believe this parent has the ability, compared to all the parents I've worked with in the last 15 years, will you please get a CASA on this case? So we take calls from the public defenders. I had a judge that called me in just a few weeks ago and said, Angela, if I told you had to appoint to this case, what would you do? Well, sir, you wear the black robe. I'm going to do exactly what you tell me to do. But everyone in our system knows that they can call us and say, please put someone on this case, and we'll do our best to try and make that happen.
Great response. Somebody else, question? Yes, over here.
We are foster parents and kinship care, and I want to say that CASAs make a huge difference in the children's lives. Our grandchildren were represented by someone out of Yellowstone County, Jan Patarovich, and she is an excellent CASA worker, and we've had another CASA worker on another case of an infant, which we were surprised. But one of the ways that we were told to get the CASA workers involved is that the TDMs, the FGDMs, any of those that you can talk with the guardian ad litem, as a foster parent, also advocate to get a CASA worker on the case for those children. They make a huge difference. And we thank all of you that are involved with the CASA program. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the more people ask for an advocate, the better chances you're going to have to get one.
Hypothetically, and never in Montana, of course, who could one seek as a foster parent if the CASA, the social worker, the county attorney, everyone is arguing and forgetting that there's a child in the middle? Is that someone like you in that certain county?
Well, so you're saying who, your question was who can be, who's the resource in Montana if the child's voice isn't being heard by the people? So an infant?
Yeah, an infant. So what I'm hearing is just lots of frustration, lots of arguments. So would that be a person like you, and how would we find that person in each county?
Well, you certainly could start with the state's attorney, and it would be the representative of the department. So in some places that would be the county attorney. If they've referred it to the attorney general's office, that would be myself or one of my counterparts. There are 4 of us throughout the state. But if there is an issue with nobody really in the case seeing the issues that need to be seen, there is an ombudsman program that was recently instituted. I think 2013 was the start of that. And so that's another avenue that a person could take, and that individual does investigate complaints about individual cases. And it's been more focused, I believe, on inner workings within the department, but I certainly think that, and not knowing a lot about the situation you're speaking of, that would be an option too.
Okay, thank you.
As a non-attorney but a former program director, I would, if you come to me, I would also recommend you write a letter to the judge. You go to court and you ask to be heard, in open court, so that you can bring your concerns to the attention of the judge. Because ultimately the judge wants to hear, but you're not a party, so he or she may not know to even call on you.
But can I just clarify? You said you're a foster parent? So foster parents are entitled to get notice of any hearing, and the law does provide you the ability to be heard at the hearing. Yes. By law, you should be getting a letter, and so if you're not, I would address that with the county attorney that you're not getting notice.
This case is like severe neglect, and so people are really upset, and there's a lot of opinions, and so I think everyone's like, well, this should be done, but then this first should be done. So there's just a lot of disagreement. And then I'm in the middle loving this child, going, wait a second, what about how are we going to all come in agreement so we can move forward?
Which is exactly why the law does provide that you should get notice of hearings and have an opportunity to be heard at those hearings.
Thank you. Great question. Somebody else? Anybody else? From anybody? Well, thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Thanks for being with us.